spearheaded what he calls the Clean Power Coalition. We Energy's Tom Metcalf says the utility is hearing the concern and intends to take action.
Ideally, if we can find a way to do it, perhaps put in real-time air monitors. So it's not an after-the-fact look at, what did we see over the last month, but it's a monitor that could give us an immediate indication if we had an exceedance, and we could take action immediately. That would be a lot more valuable, I think, for us and obviously the neighborhood as well.
But Metcalf stopped short of saying that coal dust at the Oak Creek power plant poses a health risk to the community, describing it simply as a nuisance to the neighbors. This Beats Me segment, instigated by listener Joe Dubanowitz's question, is merely a step in covering what is a pressing issue for a number of southeastern Wisconsin residents. Stay tuned for more stories.
Let's cover what's important together. Submit your question about the environment in southeastern Wisconsin online at wwm.com/beatsme. You ask, and we report.
Coming up after a break, the world of the ancient Maya comes to life at the Milwaukee Public Museum. We'll visit the exhibit when Lake Effect returns on Milwaukee's NPR.
You are well informed, listening to 89.7 WWM, supported by the Frederick and the Medical College of Wisconsin Cancer Network, where teams of cancer surgeons, radiation and medical oncologists, radiologists, pathologists, and others look at each specific cancer from every possible angle. Whether the cancer is common or rare, specialists will partner with patients to create a treatment plan. More at frederick.com/cancer.
Lake Effect continues now on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Bonnie and The largest exhibition on the ancient Maya ever to be displayed in the United States is currently on view at the Milwaukee Public Museum. This pre-Columbian civilization flourished in what is now Central America and had advanced math, a written language, and sophisticated art and architecture. But Carter Lupton, the former curator of ancient history at the Public Museum, says the question this exhibit hopes to answer is not only who were the Maya, but who are they, because they're still around.
The Maya make up one of the largest groups of native-speaking pre-Columbian American Indians that are still extant. There are several million of them living in the Maya area, which includes the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, all of Guatemala, all of Belize, and portions of Honduras and El Salvador. So it's a fairly large area. The Maya as a people are defined as people who speak a Mayan language, which there are many, many different dialects. They are part of a larger cultural group called Mesoamericans, which includes Aztecs, Toltecs, Olmecs, groups that are not Maya, but share similar cultural patterns with the Maya. They share things like the same food crops, maize, beans, squash, and chili peppers. They share building monumental architecture, building pyramids as their main temple structures. They share ideas like the ball game, the famous Maya ball game. It's not just the Maya ball game, it's the Mesoamerican ball game. So you'll find that up even in central Mexico, out of the Maya area. So they're just part of this bigger cultural pattern.
You've talked about what is similar that the Maya have in common with these other groups. What makes them distinct?
Well, as I said, what defines them officially is their language. If they speak a Mayan language, which, as I said, there are many, many dialects, then they are Maya people. Other things that make them different just by chance, for example, archaeologically, is the fact that the Maya actually have a complete written language, which we could not 30 years ago really translate very much. Now we can translate.
You watched that Black Bristol Avant?
That's one of the big changes that's happened in the last 20, 30 years. If you look at Aztecs, for example, in central Mexico, they have written pictographic documents, which we call Aztec writing, but it's not really writing. They're not writing verbs and vowels and full sentences and full grammar. They're putting down pictures of things to say, well, we got so much tribute of deer sign, so much tribute this, so they put that with a number line. That's picture that uses both phonetic and ideographic or meaningful sounds, symbols. So that's one of the big differences. And that's why we've learned so much more about the Maya. We're used to the Aztecs because the Aztecs were here when the Spanish came. I mean, the Maya were here too, but the Maya were no longer living in these complex cities that we see in this exhibit because most of those had been abandoned. But the Maya as a people still existed. The Aztecs were the big power in Mexico at the time. And so that's who the Spanish went out of their way to deal with and conquer, yes. And so we hear a lot about the Aztecs. There are a lot of contemporary reports by Spaniards, whereas there are far fewer contemporary reports about what the Maya were like, who they sort of saw as, I guess, backwater people, just living on the fringes of real civilization.
Do we know what happened, why the Maya abandoned their cities, and why the complex civilization seemed to simplify?
Well, there's no one single reason, as with so many things, whether it's the demise of the dinosaurs or anything else. There's never one explanation. Several have been proposed over the years, and we're in a period now where generally we look at individual sites and say what happened at this site. And in some sites, it's collapse of the environment over exploitation, deforestation, erosion, and then of course loss of crops. Loss of crops means loss of population, loss of power for the political rulers, can lead to revolts. And when the political rulers are gone, there's nobody to control building massive monuments anymore. So people may stick around as squatters in a site and live in the buildings that are already built, but they're not going to be building new ones. Or they may abandon them altogether for greener pastures. So it's a lot of different features and different droughts, of course. So there's natural factors that they can't control, and other things that you can call societal problems.
One of the things that I think the Maya are known for now is that they had very complex mathematics, and they also were very good and keen astronomers, were they not?
To a certain degree. I mean, they did very tight observations astronomically. Most of it was not for its own sake. Their goal was not to understand the universe and how it worked. Their goal was to explain their own mythology of how the world was created and why. And so they saw it all as tied up with religion, which most ancient cultures, you couldn't separate science and religion the way we do today. They would see it as some combination of the two. They certainly followed movements of the sun and moon. They also, the Maya, very carefully could calculate and had calculated the movements of Venus, the planet Venus. Not a whole lot else, but they were good mathematicians, as you say. The Maya actually invented, and I don't even know if it's the Maya, the actual numerical system used by the Maya may have been created by one of the other Mesoamerican peoples, like the Olmecs, we think.
And they sort of appropriated
Yeah.
it, yeah.
And the Mayas adapted and borrowed it. But they had, for example, the concept of zero, which had been created in the Arabic numeral system, and I believe one other, but is not a common concept. And without zero, there's not a lot you can do. Because it's like people ask me all the time, what's the year zero? And I say, there's no year zero. There's a year -1 and there's a year +1. Year zero wouldn't be a year, it'd be a point in time. So you need a concept of zero as a placeholder between positive numerals and negative numerals.
One of the other things that I think is so interesting about, well, the Maya, but also all of the Mesoamerican peoples, is the kinds of carvings that they did. And it's not just building the temples and those famous tall stairs, you know, they're really hard to go up, but there's these really interesting, very, very detailed, they remind me in some ways of Pictish carvings, like I've seen in Scotland. I mean, that kind of detail. Are these religious? Were they religious figures, or were they notating who the famous people were? Or?
Most of it is historical now. We used to, 30, 40 years ago, they used to say, oh, the Maya are ruled by priest kings, whatever that meant, which was archaeologists' way of saying we don't really know. So they would call them priest kings. Now we know that the carved stela at these various sites, whether it's Copan or Tikal or whatever it happens to be, they depict real individuals, historical people who were their rulers, sometimes the queens of their rulers. It tells their history. It gives dates of when they were born sometimes, when they became the ruler of that site, what famous battles they may have fought with other sites, whether they won or lost, if they had a child, and the child became a king there. All that kind of historical information can now be pulled out of these monuments, which, as they couldn't have been done 3 or 4 decades ago.
For people who are coming into this and might not know much or anything about the Maya civilization or the greater Mesoamerica civilizations, how do you suggest they approach an exhibit like this? What should they be looking for? What should they make sure that they pay attention to?
Well, what's great about this particular exhibit, it is very broad and it covers almost all major aspects of Maya culture. So it starts out with an introduction about who are the Maya and what do we know about them archaeologically, how we learned about them. There's a whole timeline here that talks about the years that the various discoveries were made. And if you're into that, you can get the history of that fairly quickly. But then it goes into Maya culture itself, and it talks about individual sites. It talks about their accomplishments, whether it's architectural. We have several large-scale replicas which are impossible to miss. They're the sort of standouts visually of the exhibit.
And these are the stela you were talking
Stela,
about that
yeah.
have the figures.
Various kings, yeah. For example, there are two here standing side by side, two stela. And 30 years ago or more, I would say, if you looked in a book, they would not know who these individuals were. They'd see that these are both Maya rulers. This one's from a site in Copan in Honduras, and the next one next to it is actually from a site in Guatemala, but it's very close by, the site of Quirigua. But we know today that the king from Honduras is depicted on a stela, and he was a very famous and long-lived king at Copan. The stela next to him, which is actually bigger, is from a smaller site. Quirigua is a much smaller site, but we know that the king from Quirigua is the man who defeated and killed the king of Copan and beheaded him. Something we didn't know 30, 40 years ago. So we can put a history to these just like you can to ancient Egypt, for example, which you couldn't do for the Maya back in the mid-20th century.
It must be exciting for someone like you who spent a lifetime trying to learn about these cultures to have that ability now. It's like keys are unlocking things all over the place.
It is. It's a total change in how you look at it. You know, when I was young, I studied Egypt, and Egypt was a culture we knew a lot about because we could read the hieroglyphs. We've been able to read those since the middle of the 19th century. Whereas the Maya were more of a, you knew the culture in general, you knew what they built, but you didn't know much about them as a people. So there was more of an anthropological look you could have, but you couldn't have a historical look. Now you can look at them historically almost in the same detail. You can look at an ancient Egypt or an ancient Greece.
You say there are still people who are Maya who are living today, even though obviously these civilizations are long gone. Do those people, do you know, have any connection to these sites? Do they honor their heritage in any way?
Yeah, some do. For example, we have, it's not in this exhibit, but in our permanent exhibit up on the third floor, one small group of Maya called the Lacandon. They live very near a ancient Maya city named Palenque in Mexico. Today, if you go to visit Palenque, there's always several Lacandon Maya around selling things to tourists that they make, and just still living in that general area and following some of the traditions. Many of the Maya in Guatemala in the south, where it's very mountainous and every village is separated from another village by a little mountain valley, live their own style. Some follow old traditions, many of which are discussed here in the exhibit. They make textiles and patterns that are reminiscent of the ancient patterns that we can see from the carvings. They live basically on the same kinds of basic foods.
How much did the Spanish influence the Maya? You say they're pretty much gone as a big major civilization by the time the Spanish arrived.
Yeah.
Did the Spanish, European, and Catholicism have any real effect on the Maya the way they did on the Aztec?
Oh yeah, I mean Catholicism is still the nominal religion of most Maya. You know, they'll say they're Catholic and then they have churches in their villages and they go to Catholic Mass and that. But as I say, they still also perform some of their rituals, whether it's rituals to ask for the rain to come and grow the corn, things like that. But they're always somewhat of a blending. You know, they'll take, for example, in Catholic practice, there are some parts of the world where incense is still burned in the church. Well, burning incense is a very typical Maya thing. So to them, it's not adapting it so much. It's just taking something they already do and seeing it in a little different context than it was before.
Well, Carter Lupton, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to meet me.
You're welcome.
Carter Lupton is the Curator Emeritus of Ancient History at the Milwaukee Public Museum. The museum's current visiting exhibit, Maya Hidden Worlds Revealed, was created by the Science Museum of Minnesota, the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and the Museum of Science in Boston.
It's at the Public Museum through the end of May, and there is more information about it at WUWM.com.
We will take one last break, and then our How Did You Do That segment on innovation and entrepreneurship introduces us to a Wisconsin businessman on the forefront of the effort to help eliminate antibiotics from poultry production. This is Lake Effect from WUWM.
Support for Lake Effect programming this month comes from ABCD, After Breast Cancer Diagnosis. Founded and grounded in Milwaukee by journalist Melody Wilson Oldenburg as a resource for people facing breast cancer. ABCD custom matches trained mentors with patients and loved ones for one-to-one peer support. More information at abcdbreastcancersupport.org.
More of Lake Effect now on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Mitch Stein.
And I'm Bonnie North.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Gallagher.
Kathleen is Executive Director of the Milwaukee Institute, and I'm Tim Keene.
Tim is founder and director of Golden Angel Investors, and this is How Did You Do That? A show about successful entrepreneurs and how and why they succeeded. After getting his PhD in food microbiology from Iowa State, Tom Rayberger took a research job at Oklahoma State in their animal science department.
That research set Tom on a commercial path that led him to his first startup and back here to Milwaukee.
Fast forward to this year, and you get to Tom's most recent commercial success, the sale of Agrobiosciences to Church & Dwight, the maker of Arm & Hammer baking soda, for $105 million. Tom, welcome to How Did You Do That?
Thanks. So Tom, let me ask you, we know that Agrobiosciences was in the business of improving chicken feed, and it's sometimes interesting to understand how the idea came about in the first place and why you decided to pursue that particular line of business. So where did this chicken feed trend start?
Really started with consumers. If you follow what consumers